and why did working conditions in the 1900s textile factories change?
One afternoon, the Triangle Shirtwaist factory in New York City caught fire, killing 146 of the 500 employees. Around closing time on the day of the fire, a scrap bin went up in flames. The factory exits had been locked to prevent theft, and the shoddily built fire escape buckled under the heat from the fire and the weight of the victims trying to escape. Many of the victims died trapped on the floors of the building, unable to escape.
Textile factories in the 1900s were extremely dangerous. Workers were exposed to unsanitary conditions, dangerous machinery, and harsh labor. Textile manufacturing began in Philadelphia soon after the city's founding in 1682. The mechanization of textile manufacture gave rise to labor issues. Work that had previously been done by hand in homes and shops was now automated in large mills that employed hundreds or thousands of workers. The workers were extremely susceptible of getting injured by machinery. The intense labor caused extreme fatigue, injuries, and in worst cases, death. Textile factory workers often got horrible infections due to the dismal factory conditions. The workers, despite their hard work, were never paid much. Employees worked 12 or 14-hour days, 6 days a week, doing tedious tasks in dismal conditions for low pay. For the average worker, the typical pay a week was $6, which also depended on the gender, race of the workers. Strikes and other labor actions were common and were aggressive, sometimes violent, responses to the conditions. Child labor was another major issue in textile factories. Children made up a considerable percentage of the textile workforce and were also subjected to the terrible working conditions in textile factories.
The Triangle factory, owned by Max Blank and Isaac Harris, was located in the top 3 floors of the Ash Building on the corner of Green Street and Washington Place in Manhattan. It was a true sweatshop, employing young immigrant women who worked in the cramped space at lines of sewing machines. Nearly all the workers were teenage girls who did not speak English and worked 12 hours a day every day. In 1911, there were 4 elevators with access to the factory floors, but only one was fully operational, and the workers had to file down a long, narrow corridor in order to reach it. There were 2 stairways onto the street, but one was locked from the outside to prevent stealing, and the other one only opened inward. The fire escape was so narrow that it would have taken hours for all the workers to use it, even in the best of circumstances. The danger of fire in factories like Triangle Shirtwaist was well known, but high levels of corruption in both the garment industry and city government generally ensured that no useful precautions were taken to prevent fires. Blank and Harris already had a suspicious history of factory fires. The Triangle factory was twice scorched in 1902, while the Diamond Waste Company factory burned twice, in 1907 and in 1910. It seems that Blank and Harris deliberately torched their workplaces before business hours in order to collect on the large fire insurance policies they had purchased, a not uncommon practice in the early 20th century. While this was not the cause of the 1911 fire, it contributed to the tragedy, as Blank and Harris refused to install sprinkler systems and take other safety measures in case they needed to burn down their shops again. Added to this delinquency were Blank and Harris' notorious anti-worker policies. Their employees were paid a mere $15 a week. Added to this delinquency were Blank and Harris' notorious anti-worker policies. Their employees were paid a mere $15 a week, despite working 12 hours a day, every day. When the International Ladies Garment Workers Union led a strike in 1909, demanding higher pay and shorter and more predictable hours, Blank and Harris Company was one of the few manufacturers who resisted, hiring police as thugs to imprison the striking women and paying off politicians to look the other way. On March 25th, a Saturday afternoon, there were 600 workers at the factory when a fire began in a rag bin. The manager attempted to use the fire hose to extinguish it, but was unsuccessful, as the hose was rotted and its valve was rusted shut. As the fire grew, panic ensued. The young workers tried to exit the building by the elevator, but it could only hold 12 people, and the operator was able to just make 4 trips back and forth before it broke down amid the heat and flames. In a desperate attempt to escape the fire, the girls left behind waiting for the elevator plunged down to the shaft to their deaths. The girls who fled via the stairwells also met awful demises. When they found a locked door at the bottom of the stairs, many were burned alive. Those workers who were on the floor above the fire, including the owner, escaped to the roof and then to adjoining buildings. As firefighters arrived, they witnessed a horrible scene. The girls who did not make it to the stairwells or elevator were trapped by the fire inside of the factory and began to jump from the window to escape it. The bodies of the jumpers fell on fire hoses, making it difficult to begin fighting the fire. Also, the firefighters' ladder reached only 7 floors high, and the fire was on the 8th floor. In one case, a life net was unfurled to catch jumpers, but 3 girls jumped at the same time, ripping the net. The nets turned out to be mostly ineffectual. Within 18 minutes, it was all over. 49 workers had burned to their deaths or had been suffocated by the smoke. 36 were dead in the elevator shaft. 58 died from jumping to the sidewalks, with 2 more dying later from their injuries. A total of 145 people were killed by the fire.
A survivor of the Triangle Factory fire named Max Hodgfield stated, "I worked at the Triangle only 3 months, but she had worked there about 3 years. She was one of the strikers at the Triangle in 1909. We hardly ever saw the main boss." This not only shows the tragedy of the loss of his sister, but also the ignorance of the bosses before the Triangle fire.
In the 1900s, New York decided it was time to see a change in the setup of textile factories, and most of all, the treatment of workers. They sorted to activism. At the time, activism was viewed as peaceful protest by the people, simply demanding recognition and social change. Despite facing criticism for their empowerment, some cloak makers in New York founded the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. An item of clothing that sparked a lot of controversy at the time was the shirtwaist. The conditions of which these shirts were produced were very harsh, leading to the female workers going on a huge strike in 1909. They called this strike Uprising of 200,000. This strike inspired the International Ladies Garment Workers Union to get involved in the textile industry, get a deeper look, see what was happening. Following the Triangle Shirtwaist fires in 1911, unions in New York City held a memorial parade, where over 100,000 people attended to mourn and at the same time gain awareness of the harming conditions of which females were put under. The Franklin D. Roosevelt election in 1932 and the following New Deal legislation strengthened labor unions and social reform movements. Roosevelt's administration believed that the uprising depression rate stemmed from unfair wages. Because of programs such as National Recovery Administration, the Wagner Labor Relations Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act, the government took it upon themselves to impose better wages and working conditions for their own economical reasons. The Fair Labor Standards Act established a national minimum wage of 25 cents an hour and a maximum work week of 44 hours. That wasn't quite ideal, but it was a step forward. By 1970, New York's total welfare allowance was 30% higher than a minimum wage. The difference contrasted in the numbers. By 1988, a minimum wage worker made $2.64 a day. An American minimum wage worker made $26.80 a day. There came an installment of workplace monitors, people who were part of regional human rights groups. They ensured the fair and safety of the workers in these textile factories. In the late 1980s, a similar idea to the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938 allowed the federal government to possess the goods produced under illegal conditions. As a result,